You're good to go.
Okay, that should mean we can start. So let's begin. Welcoming everybody to the special meeting of council concerning the application of the Sisters of the Transfiguration to amend the conditional use permit for the Bethany School. I will say that all legal requirements are met to hold this meeting by video rather than in person. At this meeting, council will consider whether to approve, reject, or approve the application of Sisters with conditions. And we have received a recommendation from the Glendale Planning and Historic Preservation Commission that the application be approved. I am now going to ask that the clerk call the roll so that we have a record of having a quorum here.
Mr. Bessel.
Here.
Mr. Howeller.
Here.
Ms. Duke.
Here.
Ms. Masenko.
Here.
Mr. Bay Smith.
Here.
Ms. Gruninger.
Here.
Thank you. All are present.
Thank you. And so we have a quorum. And we have
I confirm the quorum.
We could barely hear you, Don.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, but you cut in and out.
At some point, I'm going to try. I'm just going to go on my computer, but for now, let's get us to this part of it. And David has asked for just a couple minutes to explain the process for going into and coming out of executive session. So, David, it's yours.
Thank you, Mayor. As I attempted to, in the briefest way possible, explain the process for entering into executive session here shortly, if that's council's pleasure. Every council member received a link to a second Zoom meeting. Kathy Ryan was nice enough to set that up for us so that you could enter into executive session in that meeting, which is not being broadcast. At the time that you decide to enter into executive session, I'll ask that council members go to that Zoom link, click it, join that Zoom meeting. Kathy, you'll be the host of that meeting, so have fun, enjoy. And you'll proceed with the executive session. Once that's concluded, everyone leaves that meeting and then go back to your email to rejoin this meeting, where myself, ICRC, and the witnesses will be eagerly awaiting your return.
Thank you, David. As provided in the agenda, I will now entertain a motion for council to go into executive session pursuant to revised code section 121.22 G3 for a conference with the village solicitor concerning a dispute that is the subject of pending or imminent court action. Madam Clerk, this requires a roll call vote, but first I need a motion.
So moved.
Mayor, if I could interrupt, if you could also provide as part of the motion who you intend, aside from the council members, to be in this session.
Okay. The session is intended for the council members and the solicitor. And those are the only ones who will be in the executive session.
I'm sorry, Don, we cannot hear you. Kathy or someone, can you please repeat what Don is saying? Don?
Let me try again.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay. The persons in be our solicitor,
No,
council.
no, you're gone.
I think it works better if everybody is on mute except Dawn.
Okay. One more time. The persons in executive session will be the solicitor, myself, and the members of council, and that is it. And so we have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
To move to executive session, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller, Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith. Mr. Baysmith, you're on mute.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Groninger,
Aye.
thank you.
Okay, we are now going to executive session, and I will go to my course for that meeting. So, leaving the meeting.
Hmm. Am I still on the old one?
You do need to leave the current meeting, Mr. Howeller, and join the executive session Zoom meeting.
All right.
Same for you, Ms. Groninger.
can I ask ICRC, can we take away the executive session screen and let people see that we are back? Thank you. Right now, David is contacting the people who are involved in the questions. And when they are on and council is on, then we can resume. Although I personally am also going to call Becky Terrell just to make sure that she knows we're back.
I'm here.
Hello, Becky.
Hello.
Becky, the first thing we'll do is we'll have you take a roll call to make sure everyone on council is with us.
I would specify this roll call is to return from executive session.
Are we taking another vote?
Yes.
What are we doing? Because I thought we just voted to come out of executive session.
We'll have to do that in open session.
Okay. So what am I, okay, what is the motion then?
Just a motion to come back from executive session.
Okay. I need to know if everybody on council is with us. Madam Clerk, could you just call names here and make sure everyone is here?
I will do that. Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Ms. Gruninger
Aye.
Okay.
has returned.
That was actually just to make sure that you were here. I now need a motion to come out of executive session. Do I have a motion to come out of executive?
So moved.
Second.
Who gave that second?
I did, Mike.
Vessel. Okay, I got it. Okay, motion and second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Okay, for the motion to return from executive session, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Ms. Gruninger.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now going to begin a phase of this hearing for questions. And what we did was at the end of the last meeting on June 1st, we determined some council members indicated that they still had some issues that had not been addressed. They wanted to reserve the right to put questions to witnesses who had testified in that matter. And several have done so. And I am going to take the liberty of reading those questions and letting the person involved who was designated by the council member answer the question. And then I will allow a brief period of time for someone from the other side to identify any factual disagreement that they have with the response. I anticipate that disagreement will be a very short process. Can I ask, is Christy Boron here?
I am.
Okay, First question goes to you. You testified that the water detention system for the Bethany project is working as designed. How do you know this? What evidence do you have that proves the system in place is actually working relative to the water runoff volume?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I did type up some notes in order to answer this for everybody. And I think in order to answer this question kind of holistically, I'm going to walk through quickly, I promise quickly, kind of the steps we took, what our role was in design, what our team's role is during the construction phase, and then ultimately after construction, what evidence is there for us to be able to be confident that it is working as designed. So step one with regards to the design process. It's first important to understand that the code provisions we've referenced throughout and that your engineers have looked at were there to develop to account for volume. Their entire purpose, this code's entire purpose, is to allow property owners to develop a stormwater system on site that will adequately handle the volume generated from that site. So the county has codified those through legislation stating what's required of a property owner, and then we take those and design a system based on those numbers, which are then focused on handling water flowing from our site, not to fix any other stormwater issues, just to manage the water flowing from our construction area. So our team's civil engineer, which was CEC, they did calculations to determine grading, underground piping on the site that directed the water to our actual storm detention systems. They also did calculations to determine the actual tributary area and volume that our storm detention system needed to detain. There are multiple types of underground storm detention systems. So once the team and the owner decided on the type, then our engineers, CEC, worked with the manufacturer of that particular system to determine the
I have to bring you up short here. I don't think you're actually responding to the question. The question is actually about whether the system is working as designed, how you know that, and what evidence you have that proves the system is actually working.
Well,
so it's not so much the design history that the question is aimed at as the functioning of the system now.
Right. I thought it was important to understand all the players involved in the design, and then during construction, understand that during that construction, we have, there are folks that are continually on site monitoring the construction of the actual system itself. So during that construction, the manufacturer of the system meets with the contractor building it. They do pre-install meetings with that contractor to walk through their expectations for how their systems get installed. And then during construction, Congra Construction is there daily, overseeing to make sure that it's being installed properly. The design team, we have someone there once a week to oversee. And then the actual manufacturer of the system themselves came out before all of the fill was placed on top of the system. They came out, looked at the system that was installed in place to make sure that it was installed per their recommendations as well. So they also signed off on it, which I have information from them signing off that they in fact saw that and agreed that it was installed per their recommendation. And then on top of that, we have the county that comes out monthly and does check visits. So how do we know it's working? There are things that would be happening on site if it wasn't working properly. So if the system was not built to contain the volume that it needed to contain, we would be seeing backups occurring on Bethany's site. The system would be filling too quickly. We would have backups and we would have flooding on site, which we have not seen any flooding or backups of the system. There are 3 different outlet structures for each of the 3 underground systems. Each of those structures has a lid that you can take off and look inside. And when you look inside, you can see that the water is flowing how it's supposed to flow from the chambers, and make sure that it was built properly and the water is flowing how we would expect it to flow. So that has happened. The construction team has opened those lids and inspected those to make sure there weren't any blockages and those were functioning as we expected them to function. Then the other piece of this is if the system wasn't detaining and it wasn't slowing down the release of water, we would not be seeing the delay of the drainage happening over the longer period of time that we're seeing. So for example, after the last major rain event, both the county and the construction team went out on site and they were still seeing water flowing out of the storm detention system 2 days later. So that again is an indication that yes, our system is operating how we would expect it to operate. We want to see that water is still slowly flowing out of the system. The last piece that I was going to mention that I think it is good for everybody to understand is that there are more than one single pipe exiting out at that drainage swale in the southeast corner of Gordon's property. So while yes, our storm detention system drains in that spot, there are multiple other pipes that are also draining to that same spot from undetained pieces of property. And so for example, Mr. McSwain's yard has a catch basin in it. That catch basin has a pipe that goes to about the same exact location. So his water is flowing out in that same general spot. There's also a catch basin on Hedge Row that's collecting water off of Hedge Row that is also undetained, flowing directly in about that same spot. So just a general understanding to know that it's not just the water that's leaving our storm detention system. There's quite a bit other undetained water outside of our property, outside of our construction zone that is being funneled to that same exact location. So there will always be what is perceived to be a lot of water flowing from that general area, just because there are still other undetained properties that are flowing into that spot.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to invite Mr. Kwasinski. Gordon, are you on the line with us? Do you have any point of disagreement with what Ms. Boron has said?
You're on mute, Gordon.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So yes, I have a couple of points specific to Christie's comments. The first is with respect to the multiple outlet points that come into the swale at Bethany's point of exit, which of course by legal statute cannot be changed. So everything from the Bethany site comes out of the 15-inch diameter pipe, which, as I have said before, is at least 50% blocked. When I have gone up there during significant rain events, including the last one, there was a very minimal amount of water coming from McSwain property. As Christy mentioned, there's a catch basin there, but it's a single catch basin, and it's basically bringing a very minimal amount of clear water into that swale. The other piece is one that actually comes off the north side of Bethany's property. And that is also very minimal, but that does come off, not off the construction site, but it does come off the sheet run into the corner of the Bethany property. To my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has been, this system has been installed for over almost 18 months now. There were to be, per the permit, the original permit, as-built drawings done. Those have not been filed with the county. To our knowledge, nobody has been on site during significant rain events, whether they be 10-year or 100-year. The primary premise for the system was that it was going to catch and release over a slower period of time. There was no benchmark prior to the installation of the system to measure what the rate of release was. We still see significant amounts of water exiting that 15-inch drain pipe into the swale. And I checked within the last hour, the permit is still showing open. and shows as construction still going on. So in the county, in the records, if you go on the county Easy Track site, you can see the records for yourself. There's been no inspection logged in the last month, and the inspections, according to what's on County Easy Track, have if they've been happening, they haven't been logged. But so I do absolutely refute what Christy is saying, that they may be checking the system, but it is not working, and it's just simply not working. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, next questions. I've got two for Tim Casto. Tim, are you with us?
I am, if you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine. Can everybody else? First question is, you testified that the water detention system for the Bethany project is working. What evidence can you present that proves the water detention system design and its reliance on a single discharge location is appropriate to manage the volume of water runoff in a way that does not compromise neighboring properties?
So the design of that system is prescribed by code for how you estimate the existing and proposed runoff and surfaces, and prescribed from a calculation basis of what is the size of the detention system that you need to store the water, and then at what that release rate is. So that is all by calculation that we review those calculations that are provided by the applicant. So from how do we prove that? It's just a review on from our perspective of that proposed design based on the code that they're required to follow. That's established for developments like Bethany that they need to follow. As for the outlet point, generally speaking, that's where the outflow for that area of Bethany, that's where the water's going. That's where the water was going pre-developed and where it's going today. So the intent is, as a best management practice, that you maintain your typical drainage patterns. We would not want to take that water and divert that to another watershed, to another outlet point, because that would be taking water that had never traditionally had been to that location, and could potentially create issues downstream outside of a different and into a different watershed. So the intent is to manage that on site and then release that in the general existing location where that water has been released. I will say that the as-builts have not been performed yet, and trying to think about how do we prove that there's the volume of water there or it's working. You know, we've never have kind of plugged a underground detention basin and made attempts to measure the amount of water it would take to fill a detention basin. But that may be an option, as we know what the design capacity should be for that detention basin. If we were able to measure the amount of water that's flowing into that system, we can verify that the volume, the design volume, by what's on paper, by calculation, is actually truly provided by being able to measure the inflow to that system. So that could be an option to verify the storage volume there. And there are no moving parts or any type of mechanical device that controls the flow. This is just very simply, it's got outlet holes and weirs that control the flow. So by stopping those up and then allowing the water basically to back up and fill the detention system, we could be able to get some type of verification of the actual volume that's provided there.
Okay, thank you. Because Mr. Casto is actually with the village, I'm going to allow comments on his testimony by both sides. Although I'm kind of expecting that they're going to be fairly short from Bethany. So Ms. Boron, you have first option to respond to Mr. Casto, and I'm really looking for areas of disagreement with what he says. I'm not asking to embellish. I'm not asking to argue from this. I'm asking, do you disagree with him?
No, I don't disagree at all with him. The only comment I was going to make was with regards to the as-built. And we have as-built for part of the site construction, but the reality is we aren't 100% done with construction. We have not finished grading around a couple of those storm detention basins. That's why we're here meeting, to be able to finish the site. So because of that, that second as-built hasn't been completed. So we don't have an opportunity yet to be able to put those as-builts together and submit them. That's why there aren't any. So that was it.
Thank you. Gordon, do you have disagreement with Mr. Casto?
I do. And my disagreement stems from a meeting that Mr. Cordes, Mr. Casto, myself, Charlo's, Lisa Spalding had in March of 2018. At that time, during that meeting, I asked Mr. Casto, how will we benchmark the 30% rate of release if we don't measure the water outflow now? And I said, I wanted to install a flow rate meter at the point of exit so that we would have something to measure against. He dissuaded me from doing that. And now I hear that he wants to plug the system and now measure the rate of release to see if it's holding the proper quantity. So it seems to me, for lack of better description, I mean, the horse is already out of the barn. We will have no benchmark for which to measure. The system was approved by Mr. Casto and designed according, and the benchmark was a 30% rate of release, but we have no, I mean, the system is built and supposedly operational for 18 months. We have no basis for measuring or metrics to that point.
Thank you. Next question for Mr. Casto. In your opinion, what impact will the proposed addition of the administration building and the demolition of the library and classroom buildings have on the volume of water runoff being managed by the detention system as currently designed and operating?
To clarify my first answer, the plugging of the system, that would be to measure the volume of the detention system, the capacity to hold water. It would not be to measure the release rate of water. So it's just a volume.
I'm going to hold you to just answering the second question, please. Otherwise, we could be here for a long time.
Yes. I would believe minimal to no perceivable impact due to the minimal change in impervious area.
Ms. Boron, do you have any comment on that? Okay.
No, I do not.
And Mr. Kwasinski, do you have any comment on that?
I do, because part of the original application for, the original application for the design of the storm detention system, areas A, B, and C, stopped south of what I'll call the driveway that goes up east to, or west to east through the property. And as was stated publicly previously, the only area that was taken into consideration was that area south of that drive. If you go back into various different minutes, you'll find that, and you look at the application permit from 2017, you'll see that the St. Faith area was not taken into consideration in terms of release. If you tear down St. Faith, and if you look at the topographical drawings, you will see that topography flows northwest onto Hedgerow.
Gordon, I have to bring you up short here. Tearing down St. Faith is not part of the application that we're considering right here. So
okay.
That's not a consideration for us. The question is the new addition of the administration building and the demolition of the library how's it going to affect water runoff versus the current situation?
I think we will continue to see the extreme amounts of water that are currently running off the property. If all 3 detention tanks are currently operational, as they say they are, then if there's no change, then we will continue to see the excessive amounts of water come off the site.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for David Gould. David, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
The first question, that's a bit of a lead up to it, so bear with me. Mr. Gould and the sisters numerous times mentioned a master plan. At times it sounded like a philosophical plan and at times a facilities plan. I would like to know what the plan consists of and when it was initiated. And specifically, question A, did the master plan begin with adding the gym? If so, were they additional plans to tear down and replace other buildings? Was the master plan facilities proposed to GPHPC as a long-range design of the facilities?
Okay, I've prepared some written remarks, so I'm going to read them to you, and feel free to ask me clarifying questions. The master site plan is a facilities plan that was endorsed by the GPHPC and approved by the council in spring 2017. It included a new addition, a dining hall that has been completed, a new 338 building that is completed, a new K2 building that is almost complete, an indoor classroom area renovation that has not been started, and a renovation of 2 existing buildings. That was the Hope Library and St. Faith Classroom building, which is obviously the issue that's under consideration right now, that change, along with other infrastructure, including a stormwater detention system. It may sound like a philosophical plan because the sisters in the school wanted to make sure that certain values were expressed in the architectural design and layout that speak to the values and mission of the school and of the convent. So specifically about the gym, no, the master site plan did not include the gym. It had already been completed in 2013. So it was already part of the pre-existing conditions when the master site plan was being put together.
Okay, is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Comments first from Ms. Boron? Good call. Comments from Mr. Kwasinski?
The only comment I have with respect to the gym is that in the original detention system that was part of the gym construction 2012, 2013 was later on determined to be not functioning properly. So according to Mr. Gould, in conversations we had and in presentations, the gym, the impervious surfaces around the gym were to be taken into consideration and used as part of that. Now I know I'm going somewhere with this, so stay with me for a moment. During the conversations, during the design conversations, he mentioned that there were some issues with the gym and they were incorporating that into the overall master plan that they were doing. So that was supposed to take care of those issues.
Thank you. The B part of this question on the master plan, did the master plan include engineering of surface water runoff and retention?
The answer is yes. The master site plan included the engineering of surface water runoff and retention. This engineering project was analyzed and approved by the village engineers.
Okay. Christie, no comment? And Gordon?
I think I jumped the gun and made my comment relative to David's last answer with respect to the detention plan, that it was included in that and was supposed to address the issues, but did not.
Okay. Question number 2 for Mr. Gould. When the application for the gym was presented, there was a concern expressed about the adequacy of planning for surface water runoff and retention. Since that time, there have been buildings for elementary and primary grades. The question then is, were water retention plans updated from the original plan, or was it felt that the existing plan was adequate?
My answer is yes. The water retention plans were updated from the original plan to accommodate all of the proposed changes specified in the master site plan.
Comments from Ms. Boron?
No comments.
Sorry. So comment from Mr. Kwasinski. I'm sorry.
I think at the rate of repeating myself, yes, it was clear that they were taken into consideration, but again, it has not netted out in the long run that the system is working properly. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes all of the questions that have been put to previous witnesses and comments from the other side, from the answering person. I would now entertain a motion to close the record for any other input from a person or persons other than the elected or appointed officials of Glendale.
So moved.
Second.
All those in, let's do a roll call vote because of this, Zoom thing that we have here. So, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Yes, to close the testimony, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Bay Smith, Mr. Bay Smith,
Aye. Sorry, the screen results.
Ms. Greninger. Ms. Greninger?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried. So now we are going to turn to the deliberative part of this meeting.
Mayor, before we start, we'll have to go through the issue of the documents that were sent to you since the cutoff.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to say that I don't have a list of those documents in front of me, but let me say that from starting May 29th, which was the deadline for submitting documents for the record in this proceeding, a number of documents were submitted to the village, to me, to council members, and in each case, I uniformly informed the person that I was rejecting their submission because it was out of time. And I felt, this was only fair to people who followed the rules here. So, Madam Solicitor, can you tell me what sort of motion I need here?
It would be a motion to exclude those documents from the record which were submitted after the deadline.
Do I have a motion to exclude the documents that were submitted after the May 29th deadline?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, again, please call the roll.
Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
No.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Bay Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Greninger.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried 5-1. We are now going to turn to the deliberative part of the session. And this can be fairly open-ended from the standpoint of council. I'm inclined just to let council members speak up, and I'm sure you'll be courteous to one another about, letting people finish their thoughts and then putting yours out for consideration. I really feel like the village council is a collegial body, and it functions best when everybody hears the views of the other members and has an opportunity to consider those views and perhaps reconsider their own. So I think this is a very valuable part of the process. So I'm going to open it up for comment at this point.
All right, I guess I can start if you'd like me to, Mr. Mayor. We've been deliberating and debating what was happening here for quite a while. We've spent a lot of time on this issue. We've had 2 hearings and executive session, and I mean we've really got had our we've tried to be as complete as we could be on both sides of this issue. And I think that, in my opinion, we have a problem that stems around the water runoff due to the construction, because in my opinion, we've not seen that type of flooding, that type of change in the water direction, the backups, the mud, everything that we've seen since they started construction. I also believe that even if their water retention is working for them, it doesn't seem to be working for the neighbors. I can retain the water here, and if I dump it, the guy downstream is going to get nailed no matter how much I retain. So I think that's a problem that they have right now. But the biggest, and to not have it finished, you don't know if, and Mr. Castro, just touched on this. We don't know if that is going to be, if that final, until it's completed, we don't have any clue if it's working properly. And so I think that with that, and then I'm kind of disappointed in that respect. But the thing that upsets me the most, or not upsets me, but just is in my mind right now, is that everybody who has been for this proposal has either worked for, been associated with, is hired by, or the sisters of Bethany. And everybody that's been against this has been the neighbors. The neighbors are the ones that are directly affected by this project, as it's been working for the last almost 3.5 years now. And I think that my opinion is that before I would approve an addition to the application, I would like to see the original application finished before I would consider more disturbance to the neighbors. And that's my opinion.
I'd like to quickly say that I agree 100% with what Alan has said. I could say a lot more. However, I'll not go into legal matters or engineering matters or other technical matters that I have some real concerns with in approving this modification. So once again, I concur with Alan.
I am,
Mayor, maybe I could follow on with a few additional comments, especially some of my experience with engineering, and then I'll leave the water issue alone. There is a terrible water issue here. It's obvious to me that the water issue has been present since some of the gym construction began, as with the testimony we've heard, and it's become unbearable at this point. Regarding engineering, we have engineering formulas in place. We have physics, we have math, we have hydrology, whatever's required. And you use that to try to design a system, and we've heard this. You attempt to design a system that will handle water volume, minimize impact to the neighbors, try to control this water flow. In my experience, it's more electromechanical engineering, and I'm not an engineer, but I've got a lot of experience with it. And I can tell you just one example of a formula that was followed to select the bolt size in a moving, rotating part to hold two pieces together. And we had failure mode inside warranty period. So we did a failure analysis, troubleshooting, and we took corrective action. And this example is an analogy that may apply here. Something is wrong with the system. So what happened was we opened up the unit. The bolts that were selected were 1/4 inch and they had sheared. And basically that means they snapped in half, and then the two parts that were connected came apart. There was space to use a 1/2 inch bolt. And I asked, why didn't we use a 1/2 inch, double the size? And the response was, all of our calculations indicated that a 1/4 inch was more than adequate for this application. So these formulas that we follow, if you see in reality that something isn't working, then it's time to do a failure analysis. It's time to try to figure out and understand what's going on. The system just simply is not working. To Mr. Castro's other point, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Tim, and I think Christy might have alluded to this as well. The discharge point and the fact that the system is supposed to be working. I don't know then why we saw in video water sheeting across hedgerow where this pipe that they discharge into is supposed to collect this water and then send it to that spot in between McSwain's and Kwasinski's property. Water was sheeting across, the hay bales were pushed out of the way, there was flooding there, dirt coming off of the site. Again, the system's not functioning, so I'll leave that alone then. My point in all of this, I think, beyond the water that has to be cured, that and whatever I can do to help resolve this, I'm happy to try to do it. I don't know anything about water flow, but I mean, some of it's just common sense. One other point I'd like to make about the water is the topography up there. It slopes down as you go to the north end of the property, but it also slopes down on the east side a little bit and more on the west. So water is being collected and it's being diverted out towards the discharge point, this pipe that there is. But it's also, if it were allowed to go on its own, a lot of it would just flow northward across the property, be absorbed into the ground as it flowed across. I mean, this is truly, we're redirecting water. It's not simply that we're letting it flow to where it's always flowed. Okay, now I'm done with water. We're a neighborhood, we're a community, we all want to get along with each other. For 150 plus years, people have been living here. These houses have been here for a long time. Bethany School has been here for a long time. We need to coexist together. And I think that's one of the overarching things. I want to get away from finger pointing. I would like for some of these problems to be solved in a manner that helps everybody. Bethany School is apparently very successful. They're taking a risk in doing this build. They've got a lot of confidence in the future. We're proud of that as Glendale, and I think everybody should be proud of that, and hats off to them. It's great to see them expanding and be successful. It's good for us. But there are certain elements that are not good for the entire neighborhood. Just like the water, when the initial application was put forward, we were told the water was going to be controlled. Well, it's not. And in that initial application, the other thing we were shown was some new buildings towards the kind of the center of the campus and a repurposing of some other buildings that are closer to the neighborhood. And those buildings had been there and were kind of in keeping of the character of the neighborhood, especially the historic building is. Given that there's now an amendment to that application that includes a building that is, looking at the face of it, the scale, the character, it is similar to some of the interior buildings. At one point, there are 3 levels exposed. Well, on 2 elevations, there are 3 levels exposed. Most of the interior buildings, there are only 2 levels exposed. It's just such a large piece at the edge of the property, right butted up next to the neighbors. And I appreciate the attempt to make some of the new buildings look like the old. And in some cases they do, but when you walk up and look at it, they look less like the school buildings that were there and more like an office campus. That I have to say that assessment is fairly true. So I think in looking at the initial application and how as you got closer to the neighborhood, the building scale and massing kind of was reduced slightly and kept more in perspective with what it was. I think that's fine. The building being proposed, I think, just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the character. It's just not something that I think works well. Can you force it in through this regulation or that regulation? Perhaps. But just looking at it on its face, it's something that's out of character with the rest of the neighborhood. So I guess given that, if something can be done to make things look more in keeping with what's up there with the rest of the neighborhood, or if it can just be modified or go back to the original plan, I think that works a lot better. I think that in curing this water problem will go a long way towards curing some of the divisiveness that exists in that neighborhood up there. I know that, you know, the sisters are about providing for their mission, providing for the kids, and I know they want to be good neighbors. And I'd like to see everybody take positive steps towards reestablishing that and building something that everyone can live with. I think our neighbors have already compromised quite a bit and have put up with quite a bit of nuisance and property damage and potential property damage. Those people have invested a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money in their homes, in their own properties. They want that to be a place of peace and rest, and for them right now, it's just not. And I think that's very unfair. One final thing I would like to observe, and this is just my opinion and a word of caution unless I misunderstand something. When I see these swales that are cut into various places and there are pipes that extend up out of those, I'm assuming that's to collect rainwater and allow it to discharge more slowly. I have a bit of a concern when I see that a child could slip into one of those. And so I guess I wanted to bring this up at this time so that if that is a risk, something should be done about that. I think there are water systems that allow for everything to be completely underground. So I don't know all the science, all the reason, all the logic, but I think you need to get a hold of this project. I'm speaking to the school and the sisters. Get a hold of this project and truly make sure it's meeting your mission on all points. And that's enough for me for now. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Go on.
Just a short comment to follow Mr. Bessel and others. That given that we have a very narrow field to work in here. We have 3 standards that we're using this evaluation. And given the 3 standards, I stop at number 1, the effect on neighborhood. It's impossible not to acknowledge the effect on neighbors. And quite honestly, I'm stunned that we could verify if the detention system is working, but have not. So in some regards, I agree with Mr. Bessel that maybe there is some discussion here. But I could not support this request, simply stopping at the very first standard, the effect on the neighborhood. It's just impossible to miss.
Mayor, I also have a comment concerning the standards. It would be number 2, conformance with the village plan. And I went through and I was trying to find areas that to relate to this. And under page 52 of it, under historic resources, strategy 7 was to promote preservation of key institutional and municipal landmarks. The action was to monitor and support preservation of churches, schools, community centers, and municipal buildings. Then under land use, strategy 2, make minor zoning modifications so that the siting and spacing of new construction better fits with the established character of the village, which includes ample open space between structures. Strategy 4, limit the environmental impact of new construction. And then that was the 2000 village plan. And then later, the historic preservation guidelines were updated. And I understand that this facility is not in the historic district. However, it says that the new buildings in Glendale should be designed to fit into the character created by its buildings, spaces, street patterns, and landscaping. The most appropriate designs for new buildings respect the context and make an effort to fit in visually. Appropriate placement and orientation for a new structure will vary, but the design and footprint should resemble the placement and orientation of adjacent structures. And then the design must also follow the same setback as other buildings, which varies with location. Appropriate new buildings should be designed to the scale, massing, and proportion of adjacent and nearby buildings. Scale refers to the size of a building in relation to that of a person. Massing refers to how basic shapes fit together. Proportion is the relationship between the width and the height of a building's facade, its openings, and other elements. Proportion also affects the building's sense of scale. A building with a strong vertical proportion will impact a different feeling than a horizontal facade. And any new construction shall not exceed 1.5 stories in height at street level. I know that in previous testimony and comments that we'd received from residents, there was a concern about the vertical height and the effect of that from the perspective of homeowners that live across the street and on Hedgerow. And you know, one of the things that happens sometimes is that somebody will make a small change on their property. Well, then they go back and they want to make another change. Well, that small change that they made before is incorporated into the overall evaluation. So I think as these new buildings kept getting built and changing, I don't think we can use those necessarily as the adjacent buildings and the appropriateness of what those were, because when I think about Bethany, I mean, I remember driving up and dropping my granddaughter off when she was going to kindergarten there. And I think that the new design, even though it was approved, to me doesn't fit into the character of what Bethany represented before. And I also agree with Mr. Bessel and all the others that have discussed the water runoff, and that would come under the effect on neighborhood.
Thank you. Mr. Basemith, I believe you are the last one here. Jeff?
Yep, sorry, I was unmuting from the wrong key. Yes, being the last one, then obviously a great deal of what I might have said has been said, and very well. I agree with all the points, quite candidly. And the one that Alan mentioned, I think that any time that you contract for a project, that you may see that it complies with the original specs, but when it does not function properly, one would hesitate to pay for that service. You would not want it to be considered complete until it works properly. And it's obvious that the water runoff is not working properly. And lastly, then, relative to the number one criteria, the effect on the neighborhood, yes, it's possible to make those buildings look like buildings nearby if you remove all the old buildings and put up a different model, and each following building resembles the new building. And that's what has happened. All of the old buildings such as Faith are gone, at least from visibility on Hedgerow. And I frankly would like to see Faith remain because it does resemble the Transfiguration community. It does resemble Glendale, and it is far more attractive from the standpoint, that standpoint, than the office type complex that we now have. And that is my opinion.
Okay. Is there any further comment from members of council?
The only one last comment, Don, is regarding, there's been comment from Bethany that of the cost to remodel Faith, and I know that they had that was going to be their admin building, and part of their decision was the cost. What I heard as cost was $2 million, and that seems very excessive to me. I have had some experience renovating old properties, bringing them up to new standard, and I believe that can be done in a more cost-effective way, and maybe not platinum standard, but a nice compromise to have such a beautiful building and a part of their legacy become a showplace for them, possibly even shared use with the convent. So that's kind of my last piece.
Any further comments? Okay, I will entertain a motion here, bearing in mind that we can approve the application, disapprove the application, or approve it with conditions. So,
Mayor, I'd also like to jump in. You may want to consider as well, since there are the three standards in the zoning code, section 154.62B, effect on neighborhood, conformance with village plan, and effect on traffic. You could certainly move to approve or disapprove or approve with conditions, but you can also consider whether you have a finding as to each of those whether each of these individual standards are met.
okay, is that separate motion then, or is that part of the decisional motion?
You could do it as one motion if that's easy enough for you.
Okay, I think it's going to be a little difficult for us actually, but I'm trying to think of how we go about this. But all right, let me just ask, do I have a motion? And then maybe we can build on that motion with respect to the application.
Correct. Mr. Mayor, I move to reject the application from Bethany to modify the currently approved conditional use permit on the grounds that the proposed modifications have a deleterious effect on the neighborhood and questionably nonconforms to the village plan and questionably nonconforms to the village plan. Okay.
I'll second that motion.
You're on mute, Mayor.
I'm sorry, what, Kath?
It looked like you were talking. I thought you were on mute.
Okay, are there any further comments or builds on the motion? Would we want to indicate what bad effects on the neighborhood we're particularly concerned about? Or is that appropriate, Kathy?
Mr. Mayor,
Well, let me just hear from Kathy on my question, and then I'll come right to you. Kathy?
We'll be drafting a written decision, and it's based on the commentary of the council and the record as a whole. And that would obviously be subject to any changes if it wasn't satisfactory to the council prior to approval of that document. However much you want to provide me with detail now is fine. That's completely up to you, keeping in mind that I will be relying, otherwise I will simply be relying on what's been stated up to this point.
Okay, thank you. Marilyn, I'm sorry, cut you off.
thank you. We have a motion and a second, and I'd move for a roll call vote on the motion. And any further conversation may occur thereafter.
Okay, I think I wanted to make sure that everybody had their say on the motion, because once we pass or act on the motion, then whatever we say afterward is not quite as important as the motion. So I just want to be sure nobody else has anything that they want to say about the motion.
Can you read it one more time? Sorry.
From deliberation perspective, we should reserve that all, or keep that all for now and reserve the vote for the very end.
Okay, so what is it? Can we repeat the motion? As I read it in my notes, it was to reject the application for proposed modifications of the conditional use due to deleterious effects on the neighborhood and non-compliance with the village plan. Is that, Marilyn, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's also what my minutes reflect.
All right, so any further comment? Madam Clerk, I think you can call the roll on this one. Now, as I understand it, just again with our solicitor, I want to do everything right here. Do we need a motion to waive 3 reads here? And do we need emergency language for it to go into effect immediately, or should we let it go into effect 30 days after we adopt it? And bear in mind that it will be adopted actually on June 29th presumably at our meeting.
It will be a resolution that will go into effect immediately. And you can waive the 3 reads at that time, but none of that needs to be considered tonight. That can be part of the procedural considerations at the time that you evaluate the legislation.
Thank you. So, Madam
I refer to it to legislation, I mean decision.
This is basically a vote to give you direction in writing the writing the decision that we're then going to have to vote on again on the 29th, right? Correct.
This is simply to give me the direction. The final appealable order will be the moment the document that memorializes this decision goes into effect and is voted on.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask Mr. Mayor, are there any, Marilyn, you made the motion. Within your motion, I agree with the ill effect on the neighborhood. I agree with non-conformance to village plan. Are there any conditions or situations under which you might say that the application would be appropriate?
I think that's a separate consideration and perhaps warranting further conversations and discussions with Bethany. The vote now, what we're seeking is an up, down vote or conditions, which we really have not deliberated upon and discussed.
Understood.
Okay, for clarification, Madam Solicitor, once we vote, we're not in a position to have any further conversation with Bethany, are we?
Correct. This is the final vote. You can either approve, deny, or approve with conditions. You will take a vote. And then when you vote again with the resolution in front of you, that's simply confirming that the form reflects the decision you make tonight. And there will be no further discussion with parties.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. So we have a motion and a second. Do we have a second for this motion?
Yeah, I did. Yes.
All right. Okay, so any further discussion? Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith, Mr. Baysmith,
Yeah.
Aye.
Ms. Groninger.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes this matter. The solicitor has her direction to write a decision, and we will consider that. It presumably will be circulated well before our meeting on the 29th, and we will consider it at the meeting of the 29th and determine whether to enact it, whether to pass it immediately, or we could let it go through multiple reads. But at this point, I see no further business before council other than a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to clarify something you just said. The solicitor is to write a decision. I understand the solicitor is to present council with a resolution reflective of the decision. So it's not a decision as such that I'm looking to receive. It's a resolution for council to act upon January 29th. Is that what you have in mind also?
I think that's right. I think you probably said it a little better than I did.
All
So,
right, as long as we're on the same page.
Decision in the form of a resolution.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
I would like to second.
Okay, we have motion second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? No objection. The motion is carried. Thank you all for just an incredible feat of endurance on the part of council. I guess at one point I thought the Dries matter was as long and slog as we could get, but this one I think just matches it anyway. So I think well done, council, and thank you. And obviously this matter will now go forward. In the meantime, we can leave this meeting.
Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you all.